Sonny from Building Number 7. A What Am I Thinking? Production. Written by Ryan Laws. Chapter 1, Old Man Johnny. The summer heat baked the asphalt of the district housing projects until the air shimmered like a fevered dream. At the epicenter of the courtyard sat Johnny Loco. He was a man old enough to be a father to any of the young men hustling on the corner, though the streets had aged his face far beyond natural time. Heavy, uncombed locks framed his weathered face. He wore an oversized, faded olive military jacket despite the suffocating August humidity. In his right hand, gripped tight inside a crumpled brown paper bag, was his namesake. The oversized can of Four Loko malt liquor was his sacrament and his constant companion. Next to him rested a plastic milk crate, overflowing with his sacred archives. These were tightly rolled notebooks, yellowed newspaper clippings about corrupt zoning laws, and faded cassette tapes. He took a long swallow of the sweet, toxic brew and wiped his mouth with the back of a scarred hand. When he spoke, he addressed no one and everyone, his voice booming off the towering brick walls of the surrounding buildings. "You think you are free because they let you walk to the liquor store," Johnny roared, pointing a trembling finger at a group of teenagers. "But we are living in a prison, spiritually. You cannot see the iron bars, so you convince yourself the cage is an illusion." The teenagers just laughed. They always laughed. To the block, he was merely part of the background noise, but Johnny possessed a terrible stamina for the truth. "There are emotional, unseen wardens that control you," Johnny continued, his voice cracking with urgent sorrow. "They feed on your jealousy. They harvest your despair. Every time you bleed on this concrete, the wardens feast. They designed this prison to keep your soul in a coma. Wake up. The archons in City Hall and the precinct commanders do not want you to know you hold the spark of the divine." He took another punishing pull from the Four Loko. His wild, bloodshot eyes scanned the courtyard, desperately seeking a single soul vibrating on his frequency. The neighborhood adults ushered their children past him. The local dealers ignored him completely. Then the heavy steel doors of Building 7 pushed open. Johnny stopped preaching, the malt liquor lowered to his side. The frantic energy buzzing in his limbs suddenly vanished. Out walked a young man in worn work boots and faded denim. It was Sonny. He carried a heavy canvas tool bag over his shoulder, returning from another long day of rebuilding broken things with his father, Joe. Sonny did not look away. He walked straight across the blistering courtyard toward the older man. The younger man did not carry the condescending pity of the city's social workers. He lacked the mocking sneer of the corner boys. Sonny simply possessed a quiet, piercing grace. He came to a halt right in front of Johnny and sat down on the hot concrete next to the milk crate. "They are pulling the strings tight today, Uncle Johnny," Sonny said softly, his voice a calm anchor in the chaos. Johnny looked into the deep, steady eyes of the carpenter apprentice. The crushing weight of his lonely prophecies suddenly lifted. He knew, with absolute certainty, that his time crying out in the wilderness was over. The one who could finally break the prison wide open had arrived. Chapter 2, Truth is in the Water. The heat wave broke records that week. The air in the courtyard felt heavy enough to drown in. The city had cut the water pressure to Building 7 again, blaming failing pipes, but everyone knew it was a tactic to flush the tenants out. The invisible wardens were turning the screws. Johnny Loco could feel the spiritual suffocation pressing down on the block. He dropped his brown paper bag onto the concrete. He reached deep into his milk crate and pulled out a massive iron pipe wrench. He marched straight to the rusted fire hydrant at the edge of the street. With a guttural shout that echoed off the brick facades, he threw his entire body weight against the heavy tool. The rusted metal groaned and gave way. Water erupted into the sky like a liquid diamond. It blasted 30 feet into the baking air before crashing down onto the asphalt. Children screamed with joy, rushing from the stairwells into the artificial rain. The crushing tension of the afternoon shattered. Johnny stood in the absolute center of the torrential spray. His heavy olive jacket soaked through instantly, but he did not move. He was not preaching about the archons today. His eyes were locked on Building 7. Sonny emerged from the shadows of the lobby. He walked slowly toward the erupting hydrant. The neighborhood kids instinctively parted to let him through. Sonny did not hesitate. He stepped fully into the roaring blast of the water. His work clothes clung to his skin, and the water washed the sawdust and sweat from his face. Johnny dropped the wrench. He placed both of his trembling hands on Sonny's shoulders. The manic wildness completely vanished from the older man's eyes, replaced by a profound, piercing clarity. "I am just the static," Johnny shouted, his voice cutting through the roar of the rushing water. "He is the signal. I wash you in the dirty water of this broken city, but this man is going to wash you in fire and truth. The time for sleep is over." Johnny pulled Sonny into a deep, fierce embrace. The entire courtyard suddenly went still. Even the teenagers busy selling dope across the street looked and stopped laughing. They all were witnessing something heavy, something ancient, unexplainable, shifting right there on the wet pavement. The moment broke when the sirens started. A sleek black SUV rolled up to the curb, flanked by 2 police cruisers. Councilman Marcus Harrod stepped out into the humidity. Harrod was the architect of the new zoning laws, the man quietly selling the district block by block to luxury developers. He wore a pristine tailored suit and a condescending smile. Johnny Loco broke away from Sonny. He marched out of the water, pointing a soaked, accusing finger directly at the politician. "I see the blood on your hands, Harrod," Johnny roared. "You sell out the families in these buildings, but that is just the start. I know what you do in the luxury penthouses. I know about the foster girls you pay to keep quiet. The wardens protect your secrets, but the truth is coming for your throne." Harrod stopped smiling. His eyes turned dead and cold. He did not yell back. He did not order the police to arrest Johnny. An arrest meant a trial, a public defender, and a microphone. Harrod had a much cleaner way to silence a prophet. He gave a subtle nod to a man in plain clothes standing by the cruisers. Minutes later, a white county medical van screeched to a halt next to the SUV. The system called it an involuntary psychiatric hold. They classified Johnny as a severe danger to himself and the public. 4 massive orderlies piled out of the van and tackled the old man to the wet street. Johnny fought them with supernatural strength, screaming about the broken system, the corrupt politicians, and the spiritual prison. But the orderlies were ruthless. One of them jammed a chemical restraint deep into Johnny's thigh. Within seconds, the fight drained from his limbs. His voice slurred into silence. They strapped him tightly to a rigid medical gurney. The state asylum across the river would be his concrete tomb. They were locking him in a cell where no one would ever hear his truths again. As the van doors slammed shut and the vehicles sped away, an eerie silence fell over the flooded street. The city workers arrived and shut the hydrant valve. The water slowed to a pathetic trickle. Sonny stood completely alone in the growing puddles. His clothes were dripping wet. His jaw was set tight as he stared at the red taillights disappearing around the corner. The era of the shouting prophet was over. His own work had just begun. Chapter 3, Rock and Lil Andy. The engine of Joe's battered Ford pickup hummed a rough rhythm as they drove through the early morning fog. The tools in the back rattled with every pothole. Sonny sat in the passenger seat. He stared out the window at the brick buildings blurring past. He rubbed the calluses forming on his hands. He was learning the trade quickly, but his mind was heavy today. "Pop," Sonny said quietly. Joe kept his eyes on the road. "What is on your mind, son?" Sonny looked down at his work boots. "The older folks on the block talk. They always talk. They say you got with Mom when she was already carrying me. They say you named me Sonny because deep down you knew I was not yours." Joe gripped the steering wheel tighter. The old leather creaked under his thick fingers. He pulled the truck over to the curb and put it in park. He turned to face the young man beside him. "Does it even matter?" Joe asked, his voice a steady rumble of absolute certainty. "You are my son." Sonny looked up. The doubt in his chest loosened just a fraction. "Besides," Joe said, a warm smile breaking through his graying beard, "I named you after my favorite boxer, Sonny Liston, the man hit like a freight train, just like you are going to hit this world." They pulled up to the job site near the Navy Yard. Before Joe could even cut the engine, someone approached the passenger window. It was Lil Andy. He was a wide-eyed kid with a calm and peaceful spirit that felt entirely out of place in the district. Andy never ran with the corner boys. He spent his time listening to the older folks and trying to keep the peace. "I saw what happened yesterday," Andy said. His voice was soft and full of reverence. "With Uncle Johnny in the water, I heard what he called you." Sonny stepped out of the truck. He did not brush the kid off. He leaned against the door and gave Andy his full attention. He offered the deep and grounding presence of someone who knew exactly how to navigate another person's trauma. "Johnny saw a lot of things," Sonny said gently. "What did you see, Andy?" "I saw the signal," Andy replied without hesitation. I want to help. Whatever you are building next, I want in. Sonny smiled. Go get your brother. Andy took off running toward the waterfront. The municipal fish market was a chaotic war zone of shouting vendors, diesel fumes, and crushed ice. The air smelled of salt, blood, and desperation. At the loading docks in the back, Rock was throwing 50-pound crates of blue crab off a refrigerated truck. Rock was built like a cinder block. He was tough, loud, and constantly ready for a fight. He was currently in a screaming match with a supplier over a short delivery. You think I cannot count? Rock shouted, slamming a crate onto the wet concrete. You owe us 2 more boxes. Andy dodged a forklift and grabbed his older brother by the sleeve. Rock, you have to come with me right now. Rock ripped his arm away. Are you crazy, Andy? I am working. I found him, Andy pleaded, his wide eyes shining with manic hope. The man Johnny Loco was talking about, he is here. Rock let out a harsh bark of laughter. His cynicism was a heavy armor he wore to survive the block. Johnny is locked up in a padded room. You need to stop chasing ghosts and get a real job. Please, Andy begged, just talk to him. 10 minutes later, Rock marched up to the job site, wiping fish scales on his soiled apron. He was ready to curse out whatever street corner scam artist was filling his little brother's head with fairy tales. Sonny was carrying a sheet of plywood toward the site. He stopped and set the wood down as the 2 brothers approached. Rock crossed his massive arms. He glared at Sonny. So you are the new savior. Listen to me very closely. My brother is a good kid. Do not drag him into whatever hustle you are running. Sonny did not flinch. He looked at Rock. He saw right through the anger, right past the tough exterior, straight into the exhausting burden of a man trying to keep his family alive in a rigged system. You work hard, Simon, Sonny said. Rock blinked. His real name felt strange coming from a stranger. Everyone calls me Rock or Petey, and yeah, I bust my back every single day. You haul heavy nets for men who do not care if you drown, Sonny said, taking a step closer. The authority in his voice was quiet but absolute. You fight for scraps at the bottom of the barrel. It is time to drop the nets, Rock. I have a different kind of work for you. Rock opened his mouth to argue. He was ready to fight. But he looked into Sonny's eyes and the argument died in his throat. For the first time in his entire life, the cynical fisherman had absolutely nothing to say. Sonny from Building Number 7. A What Am I Thinking? Production. Written by Ryan Laws. Chapter 4, A Paycheck, a Gold Watch, and Matty Bucks. The concrete stoop in front of Building 7 became their sanctuary. Every evening, after the heavy labor of the day, Sonny, Andy, and Rock gathered on the cracked steps. The oppressive summer heat would finally begin to lift, leaving the courtyard bathed in the orange glow of the streetlights. Andy would sit on the lower step, his eyes wide and receptive. Rock would lean against the brick wall, his muscles aching from the fish market, his arms crossed in a defensive posture he could never quite drop. Sonny sat between them. He did not shout like Johnny Loco. He did not need a megaphone or a can of malt liquor. Sonny spoke with a quiet, piercing clarity that cut straight through the ambient noise of sirens and shouting matches. Johnny saw the bars, Sonny explained one evening, watching the corner boys hustle under the flickering streetlight. He called them archons. He was right, but he let the anger make him frantic. You have to look past the wardens and see the architect. The politicians? Rock asked, narrowing his tired eyes. Deeper than that, Sonny replied. He pointed up at the towering, brutalist architecture of the housing project. Look at this place. The man who drew the blueprints for the district did not build it for us to live. He built it to contain us. He designed a concrete grid to trap the light. The creator of this system is a lesser architect. He is ignorant. He wants you to believe that surviving paycheck to paycheck, fighting your own brother for scraps, is the only reality that exists. He feeds on your exhaustion and your anger. Andy nodded slowly, absorbing every word. A prison planet. A prison of the mind first, Sonny corrected gently. The lesser architect built the walls thick, but he made a mistake. He forgot that the spark inside you does not belong to his world. The true source is entirely outside this concrete maze. Once you realize you carry a piece of the eternal light, the fear vanishes. The wardens lose their power. They cannot tax or lock up a soul that knows it is already free. Rock scoffed and shook his head. That sounds beautiful, Sonny, but the light inside me does not pay the rent. The wardens absolutely can and will tax you. Friday arrived with the brutal reality Rock had promised. The corner check cashing spot sat behind an impenetrable wall of bulletproof glass and heavy steel grating. It was a predatory trap designed to bleed the block dry, charging criminal interest rates for payday advances, and taking a massive percentage just to turn a hard-earned check into usable cash. Matthew Buck sat behind the thick glass. Everyone called him Matty. He wore a crisp shirt and a gold watch he bought by siphoning off the survival money of his own neighbors. He did not look the customers in the eye. He just took their paper, punched numbers into a calculator, and slid the diminished cash through the metal slot. Rock stepped up to the window. He pushed his wrinkled paycheck from the fish market under the slot. He had worked 60 hours of brutal labor, hauling frozen crates until his hands bled. Matty snatched the check. He typed on his machine. With the advance you took Tuesday and the processing fees, you are clearing 40% today. Rock froze. The exhaustion in his bones instantly ignited into pure, blinding rage. Run those numbers again, Matty. The numbers are the numbers, Simon, Matty said smoothly, not even looking up. He slid a pitiful stack of bills through the slot. Next in line. Rock snapped. He slammed his heavy fists against the bulletproof glass with terrifying force. The thick acrylic rattled in its steel frame. Andy jumped back, terrified by his brother's explosive temper. I will tear this booth apart, Rock roared, his face pressed against the glass. You are stealing the food off my table. You are a parasite on your own people. Matty flinched and reached for the silent alarm under the desk. The security guard near the door placed a hand on his holster. The situation was seconds away from police sirens and handcuffs. Sonny stepped forward. He did not grab Rock or raise his voice. He simply placed a firm, steady hand on the center of Rock's broad back. He offered the deeply grounded presence of a man entirely in control of his internal environment. Drop the nets, Rock, Sonny said. His voice was a calm anchor dropping into a violent storm. He is only taking paper. Do not give him your piece. Step back. Rock breathed heavily. His knuckles were white, but the sheer authority in Sonny's voice worked. The roaring in Rock's ears subsided. He pulled his hands away from the glass and took a ragged breath, stepping back into his brother's shadow. Sonny stepped up to the window. He did not look at the money. He looked directly through the bulletproof glass, straight into Matty's eyes. Matty expected anger or threats. Instead, he met a gaze of profound, crushing empathy. You think this glass protects you, Matt? Sonny said softly. His words carried perfectly through the metal speaker grate. But you are trapped in a smaller cage than the rest of us. You helped the lesser architect build the walls, thinking he will give you a key. He will not. The gold on your wrist is just a heavier chain. Matty stopped breathing. The smug indifference evaporated. No one had ever spoken to him like this. The neighborhood hated him, and he had learned to hate them back to survive. But this carpenter was looking at him as if he already knew every regret, every compromise, and every ounce of self-loathing Matty carried. The system is bleeding you dry from the inside, Sonny continued, his voice full of quiet grace. Leave the booth, come walk with us. Sonny turned and walked out the glass doors, leading Rock and Andy onto the sunlit sidewalk. Behind the thick glass, Matty Buck stared at the metal slot. He looked at the stacks of dirty bills. He looked at the heavy steel door that locked him inside the booth every day. The spark Sonny spoke of flared to life in his chest. Without saying a word to the manager, Matty took off his gold watch, laid it on the counter, unlocked the steel door, and walked out to join them. Chapter 5, Thunder Boys. The heavy bass of a portable speaker shook the chain-link fence surrounding the courtyard. Juan and Jaime were broadcasting live. The two brothers were known across the projects as the Thunder Boys. They were fierce, unapologetically loud, and obsessed with the revolutionary spirit of Che Guevara. Jaime wore a faded olive beret and a vintage shirt bearing the face of the Argentine rebel. Juan held his phone steady on a handheld gimbal, capturing every second of the rising tension for their podcast. The city had sent private contractors to padlock the neighborhood basketball courts. It was the first step in Councilman Harrod's plan to bulldoze the community space for a luxury parking garage. Two massive security guards in tactical vests stood in front of the gates. Look at the foot soldiers of the capitalist machine, Jaime shouted into his microphone. His voice echoed over the thumping reggaeton beat. They want to steal the ground right from under our feet. They want us to stay inside our concrete boxes and suffocate. A crowd was gathering. The heat of the afternoon was making everyone irritable. Teenagers were picking up loose rocks from the cracked pavement. The security guards placed their hands on their heavy batons. The Thunder Boys were practically begging for a riot. They wanted a viral moment to expose the system, willing to burn the block down just to prove the fire existed. Sonny walked into the plaza with Rock, Andy, and Maddie trailing close behind. Rock instantly felt his blood boil. He saw the tactical vests and the padlocks. He balled his massive hands into fists, ready to charge the gates and help the two young revolutionaries tear the fence apart. Maddie hung back, recognizing the private security company as the exact same firm that guarded his old check-cashing booth. Sonny did not rush. He moved with a glacial, terrifying calm. He walked straight through the angry crowd, stepping directly between the agitated security guards and the screaming brothers. Sonny reached down and pressed the power button on the massive portable speaker. The heavy bass cut out instantly. The sudden silence in the courtyard felt louder than the music. Jaime lowered his microphone, furious that someone had interrupted the broadcast. Juan kept the camera rolling, panning up to capture the face of the hood's young carpenter. "Turn that back on," Jaime warned, stepping up to Sonny. "We are speaking truth to power. We are fighting the system." Sonny looked at the two young men. He saw their passion, their desperate need for justice, and how easily the system was manipulating their righteous anger. "You are not fighting the system," Sonny said quietly. His voice carried a strange acoustic weight that reached the back of the crowd. "You are feeding it." Jaime blinked, confused by the absolute lack of fear in Sonny's eyes. "The wardens of this prison want you to riot," Sonny explained, pointing at the heavy padlocks on the fence. "They want you to throw rocks. They want you to scream until your throats bleed. It gives them the excuse they need to bring in the riot shields and lock you away permanently. Anger is just another currency for the lesser architect. When you fight them on their terms, you are just building your own cage." Juan lowered the gimbal slightly. "So we just let them take our courts?" "No," Sonny replied. He turned his back to the brothers and faced the two security guards. The guards were expecting a fight, but they did not know how to handle a man who possessed absolutely zero aggression. Sonny looked at them not as enemies, but as men trapped in the same exact cycle. "You live 3 blocks from here," Sonny said to the taller guard, his voice completely void of malice. "Your son plays on these courts. They pay you $20 an hour to lock out your own blood. You are guarding a grave." The tall guard swallowed hard. The absolute truth of the statement stripped away his authority. His hands slowly dropped away from his baton. He looked at the heavy padlock in his hand, then looked at the crowd of kids watching him. Without a word, he dropped the padlock onto the hot concrete, turned around, and walked away from the gates. His partner hesitated for a second before cursing under his breath and following him out of the plaza. The crowd stood in stunned silence. The gates were open. No rocks were thrown. No blood was spilled. Jaime stared at the heavy padlock lying in the dirt. He looked up at Sonny. The revolutionary slogans he had memorized suddenly felt hollow compared to the absolute power of what he had just witnessed. This was not a street fight. This was a complete dismantling of the illusion. "Who are you?" Jaime asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Someone who knows how to open doors," Sonny said. He looked at Juan and Jaime, seeing the raw, untamed thunder inside them. "Your voices are loud, but your frequency is wrong. Keep the cameras rolling, but follow me and I will show you how to truly tear down the walls." Juan looked at the camera screen. He stopped recording the empty gates. He turned the lens entirely onto Sonny. The Thunder Boys had found their true revolution. Chapter 6, Maggie. The neighborhood called her Weirdo Maggie. She walked the perimeter of the courtyard like a ghost, haunting her own life. The women on the stoop stopped talking when she passed, pulling their children a little closer. The rumors trailed behind her like heavy chains. Everyone knew the story of the older dope boy who got her pregnant when she was barely out of middle school. They whispered about the abortion that followed. They shared the links to the websites where she sold nude pictures just to survive the week. They judged the deep, rotting fruit of her abusive childhood, growing up in a district they all pretended not to see. Maggie had no girlfriends. The other women wanted absolutely nothing to do with her. She spent most of her days locked in a violent, unseen argument with herself. The sexual abuse she endured as a child had splintered her mind, leaving her vulnerable to the darkest frequencies of the city. The voices of the men who had used her echoed constantly in her head. Last year, the system had thrown her into the exact same state psychiatric ward where Johnny Loco now sat. 6 months in a sterile room did not heal her. It only taught the voices to speak in whispers. Sonny and his crew were crossing the plaza when they found her. Maggie was backed into the shadowy corner of a brick stairwell. She had her hands pressed hard over her ears, rocking back and forth on the concrete, arguing frantically with empty air. Rock put a heavy hand on Sonny's shoulder. "Let it go, man. She is too far gone. The wardens broke her mind to pieces years ago." Juan lowered his phone. Even the Thunder Boys knew this was not content for the podcast. This was just the tragic reality of the block. Sonny did not listen to Rock. He did not see a broken woman, a neighborhood cautionary tale, or a ruined reputation. He saw a brilliant, blinding spark of divine light buried under a mountain of engineered suffering. He walked over and knelt directly on the dirty concrete. He did not crowd her. He gave her space, offering the radical safety she had never experienced with any man in her entire life. "They are lying to you, Maggie," Sonny said. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a specific resonance that immediately cut through the chaotic noise inside her head. Maggie stopped rocking. She slowly lowered her hands. Her eyes were wild and terrified. "You do not know what they say. You do not know what I am." "I know exactly what they say," Sonny replied, his eyes locked onto hers with absolute, unwavering grace. "The lesser architect built this entire system on shame. The emotional wardens in your mind are parasites. They take the abuse inflicted upon you by ignorant men and trick you into believing it is your permanent identity. They make you wear the dirt they threw on you." Tears began to streak through the grime on Maggie's face. No man had ever looked at her without hunger, pity, or disgust. Sonny just looked at her with pure recognition. "The body they bought and sold is just a temporary vessel," Sonny continued. He reached out and gently placed his calloused hand over her trembling fingers. "The 6 months they locked you in that concrete hospital could not touch the true source inside you. The trauma is loud, but it is all an illusion. The spark you carry existed before this prison was built, and it will remain long after these brick walls crumble to dust. You do not belong to the dope boys. You do not belong to the wardens in your mind. You belong to the light buried inside of you. I see greatness in front of me." At that exact moment, the voices in Maggie's head simply stopped. The suffocating static that had plagued her since childhood evaporated into the humid air. A profound, piercing silence washed over her mind. It was a peace so heavy and absolute that it took her breath away. The parasitic echoes of her abusers lost all their authority in the presence of this newfound truth. Maggie looked at Sonny. The frantic terror was entirely gone from her eyes. For the first time in her life, she was completely present. She stood up from the dirty stairwell. She did not look down at the ground in shame. She looked directly at the young men in front of her, Rock, Andy, Maddie, Juan, and Jaime. She was no longer weirdo Maggie. She was awake, and she was about to become the fiercest warrior the district housing projects had ever seen. Sonny from Building Number 7. A What Am I Thinking? Production. Written by Ryan Laws. Chapter 7, Juju and the Bishop. The summer heat still choked the district, but everything else had changed. Rock no longer smelled of crushed ice and fish blood. Maddie had permanently abandoned the bulletproof glass of the check-cashing booth. The crew had traded their heavy labor for the digital momentum of the Thunder Boys. Juan and Jaime kept their cameras rolling 24 hours a day, broadcasting Sonny's unvarnished truth to the entire city. Donations poured in through cash apps and crowdfunding links. The movement was no longer just a whisper in the courtyard. It was a localized earthquake. They lived off the digital support, sleeping on couches, and spending every waking moment building the revolution. They set up their new base of operations on the flat tar roof of Building 7. That was where Juju found them. Juju was a mid-level supplier who ran the dope corners on the east side of the projects. He wore heavy gold chains and pristine designer clothes bought with blood money, but his eyes were exhausted. The paranoia of the streets had eaten away his peace. He climbed the concrete stairs and walked onto the roof, dropping a heavy leather duffel bag right at Sonny's feet. The zipper was broken, revealing thick stacks of banded $20 and $50 bills. "I am done selling poison to my own people," Juju declared, looking around at the crew. "I see what you are doing, Sonny. You are building an army to take back the block. I want in. I can finance the Thunder Boys. I can buy the city permits, the microphones, the security, whatever you need to take this to the next level." Rock eyed the bag with intense suspicion. Matty smiled and instantly began calculating the street value in his head. Sonny looked at the money, then looked deeply into Juju's tired eyes. "You think you can buy your way out of this, Juju? You want to use the lesser architect's currency to dismantle his prison. It does not work that way. Money has no power here, but if you want to drop the heavy weight of the streets, you can stay." Juju smiled, missing the deep core of the message, but satisfied that he was part of the winning team. He appointed himself the movement's treasurer, picking up the bag of dirty cash. Before the crew could celebrate their new funding, a massive, midnight black Cadillac Escalade pulled into the narrow alley below the roof. The Thunder Boys instantly pointed their phone cameras over the brick ledge. Out stepped Bishop Stone. He was the head of the colossal megachurch located just past the gentrified border of the district. He wore a tailored three-piece suit and a silk tie that cost more than Joe's carpentry truck. Stone preached a strict prosperity gospel. He convinced impoverished grandmothers to empty their Social Security checks into his collection plates, promising that God would bless them with wealth in return. The bishop looked up at the roof with pure disdain. He did not like that his pews were emptying because a rogue carpenter was preaching for free on the basketball courts. "Sonny," Bishop Stone projected, his trained preacher's voice echoing up the brick walls, "you are leading these lost sheep astray. You take dirty drug money from thugs like Juju and call it a holy movement. You are a street corner cult leader and you are trespassing on my territory." Sonny walked to the edge of the roof and looked down at the bishop. "You do not have territory, Bishop," Sonny replied, his calm voice easily overpowering the aggressive posturing of the older man. "You are just another warden in a pulpit. You tell these people that the divine spark can be bought with a tithe. You sell them a slightly more comfortable cell in the exact same prison." The bishop turned red, his composure slipping in front of the recording cameras. "I bring them the blessings of the Lord. I build this community up." "You build an empire on their fear," Sonny said with absolute crushing finality. "Juju sells them a chemical high to numb the pain of this suffering. You sell them a spiritual high to do the exact same thing. Both of you are keeping them asleep. But the alarm is ringing now, Bishop Stone, and your congregation is finally waking up." Juan and Jaime captured every single word on their gimbals. They already had the viral clip edited in their heads. Bishop Stone realized he was being broadcast live to thousands of people. He glared up at the roof, his eyes suddenly filled with a cold and calculated venom. He did not say another word. He got back into his luxury SUV and sped out of the alley, his tires screeching against the asphalt. Juju laughed loudly and patted the duffel bag of cash, completely thrilled. He thought they had just won a neighborhood turf war. He did not realize they had just declared war on the most powerful, vindictive institution in the city. Chapter 8, Food for the Soul. The padlocks on the neighborhood food pantry were heavy and new. The city had cut the funding on Friday, and by Saturday afternoon, the courtyard of the district was boiling over. Hundreds of people had gathered. Mothers were stressed, kids were hungry, and the heavy summer heat was turning desperation into anger. Juju stood near the boarded-up doors, unzipping his heavy leather duffel bag. He pulled out a banded stack of $100 bills. "I can fix this right now," Juju said to Sonny, loudly enough for the front of the crowd to hear. "I can call every food truck on H Street. I can buy out the corner stores. Let me feed the block, Sonny. Let them see that we have the power." Sonny looked at the money, then at Juju. "Put it away, Juju. We do not build our freedom with the chains that bound us. If we buy their loyalty with the lesser architect's paper, they are still slaves to the paper. The miracle is already here." Juju frowned, gripping the cash tightly. He looked at the hungry crowd. There was no miracle. There was just poverty. Then Maggie stepped up to the elevated concrete planter in the center of the courtyard. The crowd went dead silent. A few weeks ago, they would have laughed or walked away from weirdo Maggie, but the woman standing before them was entirely transformed. Her eyes were clear, her spine was straight, and she radiated a quiet, unshakable power. Juan and Jaime instantly raised their cameras. "For years, the wardens of this city told me I was garbage," Maggie's voice rang out, steady and piercing. "And I believed them. I let the dope boys use me. I let the men who abused me when I was a child dictate my worth. I thought the darkness inside my head was my permanent address. I guarded my pain because I thought it was the only thing I truly owned. The older women in the crowd, the ones who used to whisper about her, stared in awe. But I found the spark, Maggie continued, pressing a hand to her chest. Sonny showed me that the light inside us cannot be touched by the violence of ignorant men, and when I finally saw that light, I felt an endless, unexplainable love. I had to forgive every single man who ever put his hands on me. I did not forgive them because they deserved it. I forgave them to heal myself. I forgave them to evict them from my mind. The lesser architect wants us to hoard our pain just like he wants us to hoard our food. He wants us terrified of starving so we never share what we have. But the spark is endless. Maggie looked at the mothers, the grandmothers, and the young men standing in the heat. "Do not let the city starve you of your love," she pleaded. "Go into your kitchens, bring down the crumbs you are hiding out of fear. When we stop acting like inmates fighting for scraps, we become a family that cannot be broken." The silence hung in the humid air for a long moment. Then, an older woman named Miss Clara turned around and walked into Building 7. A few minutes later, she came back out carrying a massive, full-covered tray of baked macaroni and cheese. Another woman emerged with 2 large Tupperware bowls of potato salad. A man brought down a loaf of bread and a pack of hot dogs. The dam broke, the fear of scarcity shattered. Dozens of people began emptying their cupboards, bringing their meager supplies to the courtyard, combining them into a massive, collective feast. As the tables were being set up, a loud diesel engine roared into the plaza. It was a refrigerated delivery truck from the D.C. fish market. The driver, an old co-worker of Rock, leaned out the window. Rock had called in a massive favor, leveraging years of backbreaking loyalty. "Where do you want them, Simon?" the driver shouted. "Right by the park grills," Rock yelled back, a massive grin splitting his face. Within 30 minutes, the park was completely transformed. Rock, Andy, and Matty stood over the smoking charcoal grills, frying hundreds of pieces of fresh whiting and croaker. The smell of hot grease, seasoned fish, and charcoal smoke filled the district. Children were running and laughing. Music was playing. They had taken a day of engineered starvation and turned it into the greatest block party the projects had ever seen. Thousands of people ate until they were full, and the foil trays still overflowed with leftovers. Sonny sat on a milk crate, eating off a paper plate, laughing with Andy and Maggie. He had completely shifted the reality of the block without spending a single dime. Standing in the shadows of the stairwell, entirely separated from the joy of the feast, stood Juju. He clutched the heavy leather bag of drug money against his chest. His jaw was clenched tight. He watched Sonny move the crowd with nothing but truth and love. Juju's mind, entirely wired by the lifestyle of the streets, could not comprehend it. In Juju's world, power was bought, loyalty was purchased. If a man could control thousands of people without material wealth, that man was dangerous. He was uncontrollable. A cold, dark spark of envy ignited in Juju's chest. He looked down at the useless hundreds in his bag, realizing that in Sonny's kingdom, he was completely broke. And in that bitter realization, the first seed of betrayal took root. Chapter 9. The roof of Building 7 sat high above the smog, offering a sweeping view of the Washington, D.C. skyline. The glowing monuments and government domes looked like a glittering fortress in the distance. Sonny stood near the concrete ledge. The humid night air pulled at his shirt. Gathered behind him were Rock, Andy, Matty, Juan, Jaime, Maggie, and Juju. The euphoria of the massive block party had settled into a heavy, expectant silence. They all felt the shift. The game was no longer local. Sonny turned away from the city lights and faced his friends. When he spoke, his voice carried the absolute, vibrating truth of a man who had seen the blueprint of the universe. "The world is not what it seems," Sonny began softly. "Everything they taught you in their schools, everything they preach in Bishop Stone's church, is a shadow on a concrete wall. There is something fundamentally wrong with this life. You feel it in your bones every time you clock in, every time you pay rent, every time a siren wakes you up. The lesser architect built this broken system on purpose." He walked slowly among them, looking each of his disciples in the eye. "But there is a true, perfect reality beyond this one," Sonny said. "And the wardens are terrified because they know a secret they have tried to beat out of you. You are in a broken system, but part of you does not belong to it. You carry a divine spark from that higher reality. The goal is not to blindly believe the system will get better. The goal is gnosis, direct knowing. You must wake up and realize you are eternal light, trapped in a temporary cage. Andy nodded slowly, his eyes wide and shining. Juan and Jaime kept the cameras rolling, capturing the profound weight of the midnight sermon. Sonny stopped walking. He turned to Maggie. She stood quietly near the edge of the roof, her posture radiating a profound, unshakable peace. Sonny extended his hand to her. She stepped forward, standing beside him in front of the men. The men of this world built the walls with ego, violence, and pride, Sonny declared. He placed his hand gently on Maggie's shoulder. But the spiritual world does not operate on force. Maggie sees the truth without the veil of male pride. She is the divine feminine. She is the anchor of this movement. When the storms come and the wardens push back, she will be my protector. She understands the spiritual war better than anyone here because she has already conquered the darkest corners of hell and returned with her light intact. A tense, suffocating silence fell over the roof. Rock clenched his massive fists. A hot flush of betrayal crawled up his neck. He had been the first to drop his nets. He had protected Sonny in the streets, stood between him and the security guards, and hauled the fish that fed the masses. He was the muscle. He was the rock. To hear Sonny elevate the woman everyone used to call a neighborhood weirdo above him felt like a knife to his pride. He stared at the tar paper beneath his boots, his jaw locked tight. In the shadows near the stairwell, Juju silently seethed. He gripped his heavy leather duffel bag of drug money until his knuckles turned white. Talk of the divine feminine and spiritual sparks infuriated him. He had brought capital. He wanted a revolution that ended with Councilman Harrod dragged out of his office. He wanted to buy politicians and arm the streets. Sonny's refusal to build a material empire was beginning to look less like wisdom to Juju and more like a fatal weakness. Miles away, in a pristine, glass-walled office overlooking the Potomac River, Councilman Marcus Harrod was not sleeping. He sat at his sprawling mahogany desk, watching the Thunder Boys' footage of the block party on a massive flat screen. Bishop Stone sat on the leather sofa behind him, his face dark with humiliation. They watched thousands of people sharing food, laughing, and ignoring the padlocks on the community center. They watched Sonny lead a community without money, without permits, and without fear. He fed thousands of them, Harrod said, his voice cold and calculating. And they did not spend a single dollar in our stores. They did not ask for a single government handout. Do you understand what this means, Bishop? He is a street preacher riling up the poor, Bishop Stone scoffed defensively. No, Harrod corrected, pausing the video right on Sonny's face. If they realize they can survive without our money and our permission, the entire infrastructure of this city collapses. He is showing them the bars of the cage. He is no longer a nuisance. He is a structural threat. He must be removed permanently. The next morning, the sun rose hot and bright over the district. Sonny did not stay on the roof. He did not hide. He walked down the concrete stairs and led his crew straight out of the courtyard. The Thunder Boys blasted their heavy, triumphant music. As they marched, the people of the projects poured out of the buildings to follow them. This was not a riot. It was a massive, joyful procession. They marched straight out of the forgotten zones and crossed the invisible, heavily policed borders into the wealthy, gentrified heart of downtown Washington. The people did not have palm branches. Instead, as Sonny walked at the front of the crowd, teenagers and grandmothers took off their denim jackets and hoodies, laying them down on the pristine, taxpayer-funded asphalt to pave his way. Traffic stopped. The affluent brunch crowd stared in shock from their patio tables. The police scrambled to form barricades, completely overwhelmed by the sheer size and peaceful power of the crowd. Sonny walked straight toward the seats of power, flanked by Maggie and Rock, with Juan and Jaime broadcasting every step to the world. The invasion of the marginalized into the empire had begun, and there was no turning back. Sonny from Building Number 7. A What Am I Thinking? Production. Written by Ryan Laws. Chapter 10. The polished marble and pristine glass of the downtown sector felt like an entirely different planet. The joyful, thumping bass of the Thunder Boys echoed off the towering financial buildings as the people of the district marched toward City Hall. They were a peaceful, unstoppable river of humanity pouring into the sterile streets of the empire. Weaving through the sea of people was a man who did not chant or sing. Ryder Lucas kept his head down, clutching a digital voice recorder and a worn leather notepad. Ryder was a heavy-hitting investigative journalist for the city paper. He dealt strictly in facts, dates, and empirical evidence. He pushed his way to the front of the procession and fell into step right beside Rock. "Simon," Ryder called out over the music. "Ryder Lucas. I have been documenting this movement since day one. I was there when Johnny Loco got hauled away. I was at the basketball courts. I saw the fish fry." Rock kept walking, his eyes scanning the rooftops for police snipers. "Then you know you are standing on the wrong side of the notebook, Ryder. Put the pen down and walk with us." "I am writing the definitive history of what is happening here," Ryder insisted, keeping pace. "But I need the facts. The rumors in the project say Joe is not the biological father. They say Mary was pregnant before they even met. Have you seen a paternity test? If Sonny is claiming a divine spark, I need to know his actual bloodline. Who is his real father?" Rock stopped dead in his tracks, his massive hands balled into fists. He was ready to throw the journalist back onto the sidewalk for disrespecting Joe and Mary. Maggie stepped gracefully between them. She did not raise her voice, but her presence immediately and completely neutralized Rock's anger. She looked at Ryder with profound, ancient knowing. "You are looking for paper to explain the fire, Ryder," Maggie said softly. "A blood test will only tell you about the vessel. The vessel was built in the projects, but his spark comes from the true architect of the light. Keep writing your history, but eventually you will realize you cannot put the eternal truth into a spreadsheet." Ryder frowned, frustrated by the total lack of empirical data. He jotted the quote down anyway, realizing the spiritual loyalty of the followers was just as fascinating as the man leading them. The march suddenly slowed to a halt. They had reached the massive concrete plaza of City Hall. A thick line of riot police stood at the top of the stairs, clutching clear plastic shields and heavy batons. Standing at the bottom of the steps, completely unafraid of the approaching crowd, was Sal. Salvatore Tarson was the youngest, most ruthless lead prosecutor in the city. He wore a razor-sharp tailored suit. He had never lost a single case. Sal worshipped law and order. He believed the strict rules of the system were the only things keeping civilization from collapsing into absolute chaos. He despised the people of the district, but he especially hated Sonny types who riled up the poor with fairy tales of revolution. Sal walked right up to the police barricades, sneering at the crowd. "Unlawful assembly," Sal announced, his voice carrying a crisp, practiced arrogance. "Noise violations, disturbing the peace. I know your type, Sonny. You sell false hope to desperate people. I lock up your type every single day. I have a perfect conviction rate. When I put you in a courtroom, I am going to bury you under the jail." Juju squeezed the strap of his duffel bag, waiting for Sonny to give the signal to rush the barricades. Juan and Jaime pushed to the front, pointing their cameras right at the prosecutor's face. Sonny stepped forward. He did not look at the riot shields. He did not look at the polished steps of City Hall. He looked directly into Sal's eyes. Sonny did not offer anger. He did not argue the law. He looked at the ruthless prosecutor with an overwhelming, crushing wave of pure love and respect. "You love the law, Sal," Sonny said. His calm voice easily cut through the noise of the crowd and the police radios. "You fight hard for what you believe is the truth. I respect your zeal. You use your laws to build walls around your own heart because you think punishing broken people makes the city whole." Sal scoffed, crossing his arms. "Save the poetry for the holding cell." Sonny took one step closer to the barricade. He spoke quietly, aiming his words entirely at the prosecutor's soul. "That fire inside you is real, Sal," Sonny said gently. "But it is aimed at the wrong kingdom. You are fighting to protect a prison. One day a great blinding light will knock you right off your high horse. You will finally understand this message. You will leave all these laws and all this pride behind to walk the exact same streets you are trying to pave over." Sonny offered a sad, knowing smile. "Just not today." Sal froze. The arrogant comeback died instantly in his throat. A strange, terrifying shiver ran completely down his spine. The absolute certainty in Sonny's eyes violently shook the foundation of his undefeated confidence. The prosecutor took a slow, involuntary step backward away from the barricade. Sonny turned around to face the massive crowd. He did not order them to attack. He simply sat down on the hot asphalt right in front of the police line. Maggie sat down next to him, followed by Rock, Andy, and Maddie. Thousands of people followed their lead, sitting down in perfect, undeniable peace. They had brought the entire city to a standstill, and the Empire had absolutely no idea what to do next. Chapter 11. The roof of Building 7 was quiet. The adrenaline from the City Hall sit-in had faded into a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Sirens wailed in the distance, a constant reminder that the wardens of the city were regrouping. Sonny did not sit down to rest. He walked over to the rusted spigot near the roof access door and filled a cracked plastic bucket with cold water. He grabbed a heavy rag and walked over to where Rock was slumped against the brick parapet. Without a word, Sonny knelt on the hard tar, took Rock's heavy, scuffed work boots in his hands, and began to wash the dirt and asphalt from the leather. Rock tried to pull his foot back, his pride flaring. "You shouldn't be doing that, Sonny. I should be washing your boots." "If you do not let me wash the street off you, Simon, you cannot walk with me where this is going," Sonny said softly. He moved from Rock to Andy, then to Maddie, Juan, Jaime, and Maggie, washing the grime from their sneakers. "The men who run this society lead from the top of the tower," Sonny told them, his hands dripping with dirty water. "They demand obedience, but in the true reality, leadership is sacrifice. To lead the new world, you must serve the broken one. They are coming for my physical vessel tonight, but do not mourn the body. Concrete and steel can only crush the cage, they cannot extinguish the spark." In the shadows, Juju watched with absolute disgust. He looked at Sonny, on his knees like a janitor, and realized this revolution would never seize the throne. It was financial and political suicide. Juju silently unzipped his duffel bag, left the money on the roof, and slipped down the stairwell. An hour later, Juju slid into the plush leather backseat of Councilman Harrod's black SUV, parked in a deserted alley. Bishop Stone sat in the passenger seat. There were no 30 pieces of silver. Instead, Harrod slid a manila folder across the center console. It contained a lucrative, untouchable city zoning contract for Juju's front business and full legal immunity from the precinct. "Where does he sleep?" Harrod asked, his voice dead and cold. "The old community garden," Juju whispered, refusing to make eye contact. "Behind Building 3, he goes there to meditate." The midnight air was thick and suffocating when the militarized tactical unit breached the overgrown garden. Heavy boots crushed the tomato vines. Blinding tactical flashlights cut through the darkness, pinning Sonny against the chain-link fence. Rock reacted instantly. The street instincts he had tried so hard to bury erupted. He drew a heavy 9mm handgun from his waistband, stepping in front of Sonny and aiming squarely at the lead officer's chest. "Back off!" Rock roared. Sonny gently reached out and placed his hand over the barrel of Rock's gun, slowly pushing it down toward the dirt. "Put it away, Rock," Sonny said, his voice entirely devoid of fear. "We do not fight the wardens with their own weapons. He who lives by the violence of the system will die by the violence of the system." Sonny stepped past his protector. He held his hands out, offering his wrists to the heavy steel handcuffs. He surrendered peacefully into the dark, leaving his disciples standing paralyzed in the blinding beams of the police lights. Chapter 12. There was no public spectacle. There was no trial. Councilman Harrod and Bishop Stone knew that executing a martyr in front of the Thunder Boys, cameras would burn the city to the ground. They needed it to look like a tragic, everyday statistic of the projects. In a soundproof holding cell deep inside the precinct, rogue officers loyal to Harrod unclipped their body cameras. They did not use batons. They used the heavy, brutal weight of the system. Through the entire beating, Sonny did not strike back. He did not curse them. He looked at the officers with that same terrifying, crushing wave of radical forgiveness until his physical vessel finally gave out. The official police report read, "Suspect suffered fatal medical complications while actively resisting arrest." The news hit the district like a shockwave. The disciples scattered. The grief was absolute. Juju did not get to enjoy his zoning contracts. The blood money burned a hole in his soul. When the streets found out he was the one who gave Harrod the location, Juju was exiled from the very corners he used to control. The paranoia and shame consumed him. He abandoned his designer clothes and hid in the dark, urine-stained stairwells of the projects, a ghost haunting his own life. Desperate to numb the agonizing reality of what he had done, Juju bought a lethal dose of fentanyl, the exact same poison he used to sell to his own people. He died alone on a cold, concrete landing, another forgotten casualty of the lesser architect. But the wardens had made a fatal miscalculation. They thought breaking the vessel would extinguish the fire. On Sunday morning, Maggie walked into the sterile, freezing basement of the city morgue to claim Sonny's body. When the medical examiner pulled back the heavy metal drawer, Maggie did not see a bruised and broken corpse. The room was suddenly bathed in a blinding, vibrating light. The suffocating hum of the fluorescent bulbs was replaced by a profound, roaring silence. Sonny stood before her, not as flesh and blood, but as pure, radiant energy. The absolute truth of the universe radiated from him. "The cage is open, Maggie," the voice echoed, not in her ears, but deep within the center of her being. "Take the spark, wake them up." Maggie ran back to the district. She did not bring a body to mourn, she brought the fire. When she told the crew what she had seen, when she transferred that unshakable, terrifying peace to them, the grief vanished. The gnosis was complete. They all finally understood. The movement did not die in that holding cell. It exploded. Rock stepped entirely out of his brother's shadow and shed the last remnants of his cynicism. The heavy brawler became the undeniable anchor of the block. He took the duffel bag of drug money Juju had left behind, marched into Herod's office, and threw it on the councilman's desk, refusing the currency of the empire. Rock spearheaded the complete renovation of the boarded-up community center, reopening it as Sonny's place. It became a sanctuary of radical stabilization, a place where no one went hungry and the police had no authority. Juan and Jaime turned their cameras back on. They didn't just broadcast to the city anymore. The Thunder Boys took Sonny's Gnostic teachings global. They became the digital evangelists of the new world, ensuring that the message of the divine spark bypassed the traditional media entirely. Matty Bucks used his intimate knowledge of the financial market to set up a revolutionary mutual aid fund for the district, completely severing the neighborhood's reliance on predatory payday loans and city welfare. Andy worked beside him, offering his calm, peaceful spirit to de-escalate conflicts on the corners before the sirens ever had a chance to ring. Writer Lucas published his book. It was a massive, meticulous, journalistic masterpiece that exposed Herod and Bishop Stone, laying the groundwork for their eventual downfalls. And Sal Tarson, the undefeated prosecutor, remained in City Hall, but the absolute certainty he once had was fractured. Every time he looked out his window toward the district, he felt a strange, terrifying light waiting for him on the horizon, just biding its time. The wardens had tried to kill a man, but instead, they had released a frequency they could not put back into the box. Sonny's body was gone, but he was suddenly everywhere. He was in the shared meals, the open doors, and the unshakable peace in Maggie's eyes. The prison walls were still standing, but the inmates finally knew they were free.